welcome to this episode of The Daily. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, last Thursday I promised you that in a future episode I was going to deconstruct line by line John Lennon's song Imagine and explain exactly why it is a terrible, terrible ideology to use to try and create a just, stable civil society, and therefore why it's a really bad response anytime there's an act of terrorism. Well, the good news is that today is that day when we are going to unpack this song and explain exactly why it is such a flawed response and why you should not be using it as a template for any sort of society if you want a true, just, stable, peaceful civil order. So let's start at the beginning. Imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try, no hell below us, above us only sky. If you want heaven on earth, which is really what John Lennon is claiming here with this song, that's the whole point of it, then how do you get that if you don't have a more perfect template and model to look to and to try and replicate and imitate? So if that doesn't exist, neither does your earthly version, because we don't know how to construct that properly. Imagine all the people living for today. You don't want to live in a world where people actually think about the past, measure what's gone on in the past and learn from those mistakes and then apply those lessons today? Or you don't want to live in a world where people actually think about the future as well, not just the here and now, so they don't consume all the resources and destroy all the rainforests and do whatever else they're going to do and say, oh, well, who cares? We're living for today. The people of tomorrow, they can sort it out because that's going to be there today. We might not even be around tomorrow, so let's eat, drink and be merry while we can. You know, imagine what this would happen at a very localized and personal level. You know, dad comes home and says, hey kids, hey wife, good news, we're living for today. Now, I've put $100 in the bank account yesterday that was supposed to pay next week's rent, but the good news is we're living for today because that's what John Lennon says we should do, so I've withdrawn all of that money. We're not going to pay the rent. Who knows if next week will even arrive? So we're going to go out tonight and we're going to eat, drink and be merry and have a good fun time, and we'll worry about tomorrow later on. I don't think we really want to live in that world. Yes, you should live in the moment, but by living in the moment, you should also, and the way you fully live in the moment is by actually acknowledging and learning from the past and building on that. That's what makes the present moment even more beautiful and important and special. And also looking to the future and making sure that your actions are thinking beyond just the immediate here and now. That's how you end up with a good experience of living in the moment. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Okay, so there's no countries, which I'm kind of assuming means there's no government, or maybe you mean some sort of big global mega government. How does that global mega government actually work without getting out of control? How does it remain efficient so that we can actually have a just, stable civil society where people can flourish? Because I'm assuming that you don't mean that we should just all break down into little villages and factions that way, because you don't seem to want any factions whatsoever. If countries are not acceptable, then how could villages be acceptable? Because presumably if countries are a problem because they can go to war with each other, then couldn't villages also go to war with each other? So the only real solution you seem to be suggesting is one big, massive, global conglomeration of people. But how do we govern that with any sort of efficiency and safety? I can't see how that can work. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Okay, first bit. Nothing to kill or die for. So are you really suggesting to me that if someone broke into your house and was trying to rape and kill your family, that you wouldn't take action, even possibly the use of lethal force, or call on a police force that you would expect to use lethal force in order to protect those innocent people from that violence? And let's say your family was drowning. One of your kids was in a river or in a swimming pool drowning, and the only way to save them was for you to risk your life. Would you consider it worth dying for that cause? And we're living in a world with no religion. So does that mean that when the Roman Empire fell and broke apart, that there were no religious monks to actually safeguard all the important academic thought and writings and other things that we now rely on today, and which have helped us to build society to a far better place than what it was 2,000 years ago? Does that mean that there are no religious groups like there are today that currently foster and encourage a healthy respect and attitude of charity and love for the poor and for those who are more vulnerable in our communities? That we're just living for today and we're living for ourselves? Is that the alternative here? Because I can't see what else you're proposing here as a replacement for what is clearly an important part of the human experience. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Yep, living in peace is great, or relative peace, because you can never live in perfect peace. That's just naive, and it's not the human experience. It's not real. It's not reality. That'll never be achievable. But we can live in a relatively stable and peaceful society, despite those moments where the peace is disrupted. But to achieve that, you actually need a good, healthy, and efficient and properly functioning governance system. And you can't achieve that if we just live in one big, massive conglomerate that's global. The only way to achieve that is actually by localizing more of the governance. Because the more local you are, the more you understand the local needs and the better you can respond to that. And if you don't respond to those needs, that's when things become arbitrary and problematic for people and unrest arises in its place. As a famous person, I want to say G.K. Chesterton, but apparently it's not entirely accurate, but some famous person once said, when man stops believing in God, he doesn't believe in nothing, he'll believe in anything. So creating an ideological vacuum doesn't mean that there's going to be non-belief in happiness. It means that people are going to start substituting all sorts of other beliefs in place of the ones that you have disposed of with this particular ideology. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. There's an interesting line in this chorus. I hope someday you'll join us. You see, that kind of implies that this is actually like a religion or a cult or a group that you have to give your allegiance to. So now it sort of sounds like what you've actually done is you've substituted religious belief and patriotism, commitment to your country, commitment to your family, whatever it is, for your new brand of collectivism, and you're expecting people to join up with that. It actually kind of sounds, and especially when you look at the doctrine of this song, this actually kind of sounds like a bit of a faux religion that you're putting forward here, especially when you add to the fact that you're asking people to join you. Imagine no possessions, I wonder if you can. What about your craftsmen, your electricians, your builders, your engineers? Are their tools theirs? Are they allowed to own those as possessions? Because if they're not, then how does anything great get done in your society? If your best electricians, your best engineers, your best minds can wake up one day and discover that all of their property, their intellectual property, their tools, their computers, whatever they need, are gone because they don't actually own them. Someone else has just turned up and walked off with them. And that's not theft, that's just how your society operates. Then how the heck does anything actually get done? How does anything meaningful in the way of forward momentum and progress actually start to happen? You actually do have to have some sort of possessions in a society, even if they are very simple. You still have to have possessions of some kind. Having no possessions is not really a recipe for a stable and flourishing society. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Okay, that's great, but why wouldn't there be greed? You see, human nature is not going to disappear just because you've written this song and just because everyone says, yay, we don't want to be human anymore. Human nature is still going to be present. And so greed is one of those tendencies that people have in their flawed human nature, the tendency towards greed, selfishness, lust, murder, hate. Pick an issue, right? These things call to us. And we fall into the trap, into the temptation of giving into them, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in really big and horrible ways. But this is the human condition. So where exactly is this greed? And greed's not a need, by the way. Where is greed, and how is greed going to disappear? Well, we'll just share everything. Yeah, well, we've already tried that. It was called communism. And communism didn't work on two levels. Number one, there were two distinct classes within communism. The people at the top who had all the stuff and everyone else who was expected to share all their stuff with the people at the top. And there was a whole lot of murder that went on. Tens of millions of people were murdered by this whole notion of a state that was built around the idea of collectivism, that didn't actually respect the individual and didn't know how to respond properly and with balance and make the distinction between a lack of virtue and a genuine criminal or evil act, that was a lot more grave and needed the state intervention. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. Great, but once again, I come back to that question, what do you mean sharing all the world? how does that actually work? Because you need some sort of governance to maintain basic infrastructure, right? So how does that actually work? You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Now, when you say one, what do you mean there? Do you mean one large, giant empire? Or do you mean one large, monolithic hive mind that is not allowed to think for itself, where people are not allowed to think for themselves? And what happens in that society when someone says, I want to think for myself? What happens in that sort of society when someone says, I can see a better way of doing this, but the rest of the collective say, no, this is how we do it. You're not allowed to do it your way. How do you ever get entrepreneurship? How do you ever get scientific breakthroughs and changes and important developments if people aren't actually allowed to have moments where they're renegades? What happens if someone in this society where we're all one, what if they decide that they actually want to be religious? What if they decide they want to believe or think differently to the rest of the hive mind? What happens to them? How can you maintain this society? And what happened to human nature? If you're going to tell me this is all just voluntary and it would just magically happen, well, what happened to human nature? Are we now just zombie robots who just wander around and we no longer have emotions, temptations, desires, or any of those kind of things that lead us down these paths that aren't good? Whichever way you spin this song, it really is not a good, in fact, it's a recipe for disaster. If you tried to build a society around John Lennon's Imagine, we'd be in real trouble. And that's why we need to stop using this song as a response to acts of terrorism. Because ironically, when you think about groups like ISIS, they actually want to establish a one world system, a single hive mind that does not differentiate and does not, and it was certainly not allowed to walk off the beaten path. And if you do, well, in their world, you actually get killed for doing it. Ironically, they're closer to living out this vision, and that's why it's such a problematic one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily.